Welcome to Real Estate 360 Live with Ryan Sloper, the trusted name in real estate radio. Now, here's Ryan Sloper.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Real Estate 360 Live. For those of you not familiar with the podcast, my guest and I will cover every angle of real estate from interest rates to the economy to what's happening in Washington, the Federal Reserve, Congress, the president. We talk about everything. Obviously, we've been jumping in a lot to the Russia-Ukraine situation, the potential implications of what's taking place there on the home frontier. We're going to dive much deeper than just, basic real estate stuff, whether, we're talking about pending home sales, whether we're talking about price appreciation or depreciation, mortgage interest rates, credit repair. We're going to cover a little bit of everything, but we typically dive deeper into the politics of things and how that affects real estate. Obviously, real estate has become more of backpage news as of late, but we're still going to, talk about all the pertinent things that you need to get to make educated, informed decisions about your real estate, whether you're looking to buy or sell homes. Obviously, we've got another great show lineup for you guys today. One of the topics we're going to cover, we're going to jump into gold and silver. Why are these prices so low? We're going to talk about the new FICO scoring model, which is FICO 9. And actually, this could be something else that opens up. It's going to take a little while for lenders and banks and financial institutions to implement this model. But what I think it means is it's going to be easier for people to get loans done if this does get pushed through. So you want to stay tuned for that later in the show. We're going to dive deep into the unemployment rate, the employment non-farm payrolls that came out last week. Obviously, it was a big miss, and we want to kind of talk about what we think is going on that front, and we'll jump into some other topics throughout. But if you haven't already, make sure that you go to the iTunes store and subscribe to the show so you can download instantly to your Apple device, whatever it is that you use there. And if you search Real Estate 360 in the search bar in iTunes, it'll pull right up. Please leave reviews. If you like the show and you get something out of it, and forward and share to your friends and family members that may get something out of it as well. Also, you can stream it live at realestate360live.com. That's realestate360live.com. On the right-hand side, there's an Ask a Question button. That's where I push everybody to. If you do have questions or topics that you want us to cover on the show, this is, a show for everybody. It's not just for us to sit here and talk about what's going on. But if you have specific questions that we can help you get answered, we'd be glad to cover that. So hit that Ask a Question button, and we'll get those covered. Joining me on our panel, as he does each and every week, is Louis Camarosano. Louis is a former school teacher, a former attorney, and a former general manager of a major real estate portal. He's been cited in the media as a real estate industry expert in Forbes, Wall Street Journal, Fox Business, U.S. News, MSN, and numerous others. Louis, how are you doing today?
Doing grand, Ryan. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for asking. So,
excellent.
I think a good place to start, obviously, as we typically start every week, is we start talking about what's going on in the market as far as economic, events that were on the calendar. So the big one from last week, which took place on September the 5th, was that the August non-farm payrolls increased by 142,000 versus an estimated of 225,000, which was an absolute huge miss, right? By many trader standards and stuff like that. However, the unemployment rate came in at 6.1 versus an estimated of 6.1, I believe. Or was it at 6.2 they were estimating? I think they were estimating the same.
I know they're under. They're continuing to go down.
Right. So I think they were estimating 6.2. They came in at 6.1. So that came in. Of course, traders just completely pretty much shrugged this off. It wasn't a big deal. They say that August is typically a month that gets revised upward every year. So once again, they can just create an excuse out of thin air as to why it is that they don't want to pay attention to something. Initial weekly jobless claims came in on 9/4 at 302,000 versus an estimated 300,000, so slightly above. Non-farm productivity, 2.3% versus 2.5%. But one of the biggest things that I want to pay attention to, Louis, is that the labor force participation rate dropped to its lowest level since 1978. People not counted in the unemployment rate has climbed to a record 92.3 million. Now, I don't know what anybody else wants to look at, but that seems like that would be a pretty important number to pay attention to, right? 92.3 million? That's absurdly high. And I think it kind of highlights really where we are as an economy, right? And the fact that the key number that everybody else wants to pay attention to is that unemployment rate, where people that are not counted in the unemployment market anymore, they're not even paid attention to anymore. And that number is continuing to get worse. It's climbing at a pretty rapid pace. Would you not agree, Louis?
Absolutely.
And it further highlights the fact that, these big companies, they're not going out there and hiring. They're actually cutting positions. It's easier to take two jobs if you had paying two people $50,000 each, get rid of one, increase another person's responsibilities and pay them $75,000, and they're going to save on that other front, right? This is a trend. There's a lot of outsourcing now to these big, huge staffing companies where they can basically contract out the work so they don't have to be responsible for benefits and everything else. They might pay a little bit more, but they don't have all those other costs and burdens that are involved if they just hire them directly. This is, and then we have the whole part-time economy, which is essentially, people that are taking part-time jobs or multiple part-time jobs in order to try to just, make ends meet. It's not like by taking 4 or 5 part-time jobs, typically that's going to mean that, you're getting ahead of the curve. You're not. Typically, it's just enough to survive. But these numbers, to me, just continue to show that whatever they want to tell us on all these economic reports, things are getting worse. They're not getting better. They can continue to point to, look, well, month over month, it seems like we're better than we were earlier this year, but we weren't good earlier this year.
That's what we call the law of small numbers, right? It looks good that you've grown 3% off a 0.5%. So what? Right.
I mean, a 62.8% labor participation rate.
Yeah, well, Yellen says that is a function of demographics, but it's not, because people aren't retiring. In fact, the biggest growth in the labor market is in people 55 and over. So that's a load of nonsense, because jobs are being lost in the 28 to 55-year age bracket, the peak earning years for most people, and jobs are being gained at the 55-plus years, which indicates that people are either deferring retirement or coming back from retirement. So you can't explain away the labor participation rate declining because of demographics. It's not demographics. No. It's the economy.
It's absolutely the economy, Louis. And when we're talking about real estate, because we always bring things back to real estate, this is the number one reason why basically the real estate market has basically just completely leveled off. It's stagnant. There's nothing really going on. We have a low
wage or job growth.
Right. There's no growth there. We have
End of
more
story.
People.
Got nothing to do with inventory or interest rates, whatever excuses they want to make. It's people don't have the money and people don't have the jobs. Lowering interest rates doesn't fix it.
And
lowering credit standards even doesn't fix it. You still have to have some money.
Right, and yet we're conditioned by the Fed and Congress and the president and everything that these programs are out there to help people, and that it is possible to get a mortgage. And you know what? It's possible to apply for a mortgage, but it's damn near impossible to get one. Right? So it's very easy to apply for a mortgage, and if you notice, it's very easy to get a credit card or to at least apply for a credit card, because you're going to get hundreds of those offers in the mail. But it doesn't mean that they're going to issue the card, the money, right? And it's more of a marketing and advertising scheme than anything else, and it continues to be. I mean, I talk to people day in and day out, and we get through the process that they want to buy a house. They don't really have any money to buy a house, but they know that there's some programs out there. Can I point them in the right direction? But the reality is that those programs that don't require much investment, there's a lot of other critical standards that you must meet, which is probably a higher credit score. Your debt to income ratios need to be lower. You can only make a certain amount of money, so you can't make too much money, or you're not going to qualify for that program. So it is.
And you know why people's debt to income are not good anymore? Not only because the cost of living is higher, but because subprime lending, as you pointed out a few weeks ago, on credit cards has been extended. So people are tapping out on their credit cards, raising their debt to income levels. And subprime auto lending has exploded too. So you can get loans, you just can't get a home mortgage, but you can buy anything you want on a credit card, or you can buy a car. You just can't buy a house. And you can't buy a house because you're tapped out on your consumer credit.
Right. Yep. Yeah, and I've heard stories all day long of people getting auto loans, Louis, at like 25, 30%.
No problem. And if you want to pay, and there's no problem getting a credit card. Second credit card.
And you have to have a vehicle to drive, right? And so when people have terrible credit, they're going to take whatever they can get. So, these bad loans, I mean, basically loan shark type loans are the ones that they're getting. That's not something.
Help the economy, right?
No,
because people aren't building their savings, and in fact, the St. Louis Fed came out and said the problem with the economy now is Americans are hoarding money. I don't know if you saw it. Did you see that one?
No, I did not.
We're hoarding money, and that's the problem. They print trillions of dollars, give it to the banks, and wonder why we aren't spending the dollars that we don't have. People are borrowing money. They're not hoarding money. It's not like people are increasing their savings rates. When he says hoarding money, he means they're not taking on as much subprime credit as they want them to. It's just unbelievable. The Fed is living in fantasy world saying that people are hoarding money. Then you have this Kocher-Lakover guy out in Minneapolis, the Fed president there, saying interest rates aren't low enough and we don't have enough inflation. And he's perplexed, given where we are with inflation, meaning we need more of it. It's challenging to know why we are removing stimulus from the economy. Well, because you've had stimulus to the economy for 6 years. You poured $4 trillion into it. You've had interest rates at the lowest rate in U.S. history for 6 years, and you're wondering why you're trying to remove it. Well, they're not trying to remove it, Ryan, right? You have Plosser. He's saying low rates are a problem. Here's a guy who's been advocating them for 6 years, and then he says he's not suggesting rates should be increased now. No, of course not. He's the biggest hawk on the – he's the only dissenter, and he's not even asking for rates to be raised now. He just asked people, well, let's think about this. Maybe they shouldn't be so low.
Right.
Ryan, when you look at the jobs report, right, the jobs report was, 140-some-odd thousand? Well, it's a joke when it's over 200,000 and they make it out to be a big deal because we know that 200,000 is the net number after you take away the 400,000 full-time jobs that you lost, and you gain 600,000, they start cheering. Well, now you're at 140. How do they cheer that? They say, oh, well, we don't believe those numbers.
Right.
What is there not to believe? No one got a job in August, even part-time. And you know why they did that, Ryan? This is, again, your point. They did not want people to think, to get too ahead of themselves. They have been pumping and promoting, hey, we were right. The economy's recovered since the cold, nasty winter. We've had 6 months of strong job growth. No, we didn't, but they said that we did. So, and that made people thinking, oh, well, they're going to raise rates because the economy's on the rebound, the job market. Then they have to have this, realistic job number come out to make people think, oh, they're not going to raise rates. Yep. Morgan Stanley came out the other day and said they might not raise rates to 2016. They're probably right. What they might do in 6 months to a year, they might raise rates 1/4 point, and that'll be it. They're not going to raise rates steadily up to 5, 6, 7% from where they are. That's fantasy. They can't do that.
No. Yeah.
But they want people to think that they're thinking about, just like they did with the taper. They wanted people to think that they were going to cut QE, and you kept saying they won't cut it. Okay, they finally did cut it, but not after they printed another $1 trillion from when they started talking about cutting it.
Right.
The same with interest rates. They'll keep them low and keep talking about keeping them low, about raising them, but they'll keep them low.
Well,
zero.
And look, they know. The Fed knows that the employment situation is correct, right?
Of course, but they wanted to say it was good the last 6 months.
Right. They would
to justify tapering.
Right. They would completely be.
Now they can come back, Ryan. Now they can come back when it didn't work out and say, oh, well, we thought it was working out, but then Russia or something. And then they have to go back to printed money or, as you call it, another QE program under a different name.
Yeah, and it's it looks like it's heading that way again. I mean, I almost think that it's funny. I feel like the BLS, the ones that put out a lot of these reports, I almost feel like that they have a calendar, January to December, and it's basically okay, this month it's going to be a negative reading, this month a negative reading, this month a positive reading, right? And it's going to be every third or fourth month there would be something to bring you back to reality, something that would give Yellen and the Fed a reason to pause, to change their rhetoric again, and to adjust as needed. And it's crazy because we've been watching this
way of walking the market up so it doesn't get out of hand, so that they don't have a tremendous bubble. But it's what they do to keep their what they want in the end is to keep rates low and to print money.
Yep.
So if they just said we're going to keep rates low and print money, things would get out of hand for them. They wouldn't be able to get away with that.
Right.
So they have to act like they don't want to print money for a while. They have to act like they don't want to keep rates low, and they have to act like the economy is not accelerating. You know, and then when they have to act like the economy is accelerating, and then when it looks like it's accelerating, they have to stop printing money and lower rates. They have to act like, well, no, the economy is not accelerating.
Right.
At some point, they want to do is we talked about this for years. They gain their credibility by stopping the QE, just enough so they can start it again. Because this isn't the first time they've stopped QE.
Right.
They didn't say, well, this is QE and it's the last QE and we're never going to do QE again. All they said was we're going to end this program for the fourth or fifth time. Right? They'll start it up again if they have to. What happens if Euro decides to increase their QE and there's an imbalance? You know, the dollar rises too high, the Euro goes down too low. How else is the United States going to make the dollar drop? They just have to print more of them.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw that, but there was an article on Zero Hedge. Basically, one of the JP Morgan guys, I can't remember his name, basically was coming out and saying the current episode of excess liquidity is the most extreme ever. And basically the ECB, there's been this liquidity boost, as we know, amongst other central banks that have been really pumping more and more money into the market now, which we know when we have all these negative reports and all of a sudden the stock market's still going up and we still have mortgage rates hanging low, it doesn't make sense, right? This is like disastrous long-term plays because they've created a massive, massive, massive bubble. So the only way that this can continue is for all central banks to basically be on the same page to time things as they see fit, to move markets as they seem fit. It doesn't matter, Lewis, whether you and I think gold or silver prices are going to go up and down because they're going to manipulate it as they see fit, right? Correct. We can't do anything other than commentate on the crap that they're doing because we don't know what they're going to do. We were projecting gold and silver prices to be higher. We have silver at $19 right now. 1979,
1980 prices.
Right, and we have labor participation rate basically at 1978 levels, right? The lowest, 19.3 million people. I mean,
wait, when women weren't in the labor force to the extent that they are and need to be today?
Right. What was the?
Well, which makes it worse. You know, because the labor participation rate was lower in the 70s because many women still had the traditional role as housewives and didn't work.
Right. Well, you know, we have that labor participation rate. Then we turn around and we have the U6 rate, which is people working at their jobs that are not full-time and not what the workers are actually seeking, at a 12% unemployment rate for discouraged workers. So even the people that do have jobs, Lewis, they're not happy with their jobs, right? And they're probably not very.
Well, wage growth isn't increasing.
No.
But the price of food, gas, energy, and insurance is, and then they tell you have no inflation. I saw Henry Blodgett pounding the table on a Yahoo Finance thing, saying the people have been talking about inflation. They've been wrong, dead wrong. Yeah, if you believe the CPI numbers, maybe they're dead wrong. But if you actually spend money in the grocery store, you buy gas, you pay your rent, you pay your insurance premiums, you heat your home, prices have gone up. Even according to the CPI, if you do a basket and you just take from the year 2000 to 2014, they've, in many cases, some of them have doubled, many of them go up, 20, 30, 40, 50%. Yeah. So it's almost they want to tell you, and then and so that you'll believe that things are more expensive. They're denying reality, even denying their own numbers, because by the CPI numbers we have decent amount of inflation. Yeah. With no corresponding wage inflation. So that means your standard of living has gone down, and they're trying to tell you, well, you're an idiot and you're a gloom and doomer because there's no inflation. All right, well, maybe there's not much inflation according to the way you measure it, but there's less wage growth. Right. Yeah. So on a relative basis, you're out.
But, Lewis, it's like I said, and that's why these reports, we have to talk about them because this is what gets pumped out. This is what makes headlines, and this is where people draw their information from. But we know that those same people that are reading these reports, that are basically taking this information and making, decisions based upon whether they're going to buy stocks or real estate or anything else, they go to the grocery store just like we do. And if they don't see that every time they go up with like one bag of stuff and it costs almost double what it did a couple of years ago, they're completely blind. right?
Well, do you know why they're blind, Ryan? Because, and I've been working on this blog post for the longest time, is because most people, if their credit card's in debt and they use credit to buy groceries, doesn't really matter to them. They don't notice the price. They don't know whether if they paid $111 this year and next year they pay $120. That's a big difference, but it's not a difference. You just put it on the credit card. So they're buying the same stuff. Even if the packages are small, a lot of people don't notice that either. So the inflation isn't felt in the same way it was when you used to go to the grocery store in the 70s and you had cash in your pocket. Then it was tangible and real. You realized, wait a minute, I used to come with $100 and not have to worry about running over. Now I have to count what's in the basket. That's where the problem is. They're directing us towards a cashless price society.
Oh, most definitely. I mean, that has become very apparent lately. And you know, I wanted to kind of segue into this week's credit tip earlier than we normally do because I think this kind of shows where banks and lenders are trying to get creative now because they know people's credit score is lacking, mainly because they don't have jobs. So they're stacked, you know, basically having to put everything on credit. So I believe it was last week or 2 weeks ago, FICO announced a new scoring model, FICO 9 it's called. And now this new algorithm is essentially meant to be a better predictor of risk for the banks and lenders that will use it. So most lenders are typically pretty slow to adopt these new FICO models on a national level because it's not necessarily an easy thing to do, but there's some interesting things to note in this model. One is that paid collections will have no negative impact on scores, assuming that they're satisfied, but, you know, or assuming that they are not settled but rather paid in full. So a lot of times, like if you still had collections on your account and you hadn't paid, it's still going to ding you for a certain amount of period of time. Also, unpaid medical collections will have considerably less negative impact on consumer scores. So they're recognizing the fact that people don't have money to pay their medical bills, right?
Right.
And obviously it's a major problem on people's credit report because, as we know, the medical collection industry, I think that they collect. My mom worked at one of the biggest hospitals in Northern Virginia, Fairfax, and I want to say that she said that most of the time they only collect about 30% of what they bill out.
Wow.
Right? Yeah, it's absurd. Like the amount and that's why we wonder why there's all these rising healthcare costs because they're not getting enough money. Like if you're only going to bill out and get 30 to 40% of what you're billing, and then after you're done with that, you're going to sell that collection off to another company, right? They're going to
think about it, Ryan. If they would just cut medical costs by half, they'd probably get their bills paid more and they'd make more money, just like any other product.
Right, and what happens when people see that big number, Louis? They're like, well, I'm never paying that.
I can't even get close to that. Right, if you get a bill for $1,800 and you've already got rent, you have your health insurance premium, you can't, and you have a car payment, you can't pay $1,800 that month, so you don't pay it.
Right. Well, imagine you getting if you actually had a serious accident or something, you had to go in the emergency room and were there for a week or so, and you get a bill for $120,000. What are you going to do with that?
There you go. Right.
You know, that's not nobody's paying that. So if they remove that from the credit scoring model, and now all of a sudden these unpaid medical collections don't really have a negative effect, essentially, well, that's going to make people not want to pay their medical bills even more because they know that it's not going to hurt them.
Yeah, so they'll know what the medical industry do? They'll raise prices even more.
Right.
Which will make more people not pay them.
Right. This is such a vicious cycle. But, you know, in bringing it back to the real estate component, one of the things that we always see is that can
what was the credit tip? Was that
okay, so the credit tip is that essentially if this new scoring model comes into play, it will open up, I'm willing to venture, probably 25% of the market with lower credit scores because this is going to boost their scores back up, right?
Right.
So naturally, if they're going to not hit as much on these collections, it's going to bring people's scores back up because one of the things that lingers on most people's credit reports are these dumb medical collections. Like I see it all the time. Or parking tickets that got hit on somebody's credit report that they paid, and for some reason it's not updating properly. If those things are basically not, you know, taken into consideration, not as much, credit scores are going to go up probably 50, 60, 80 points, which could for many people. I mean, I'm willing to bet it's probably 25% of the people that are out there because I know the number of people that come through the system that are within close to the range. Like let's say that 620 is like that average credit score you need to get to really be considered. They might be at 585, 580. That's where a lot of the scores are falling now. if this new model is implemented by lenders, which I think it will be, I think that this is going to be something that's going to be implemented very quickly because lenders want to make more money. They have to find a way to do it. If they don't really change their underwriting guideline standards, but they can change the way credit scores are derived, right? It allows for them to give more loans without having to change the whole system to where it's like people are like, oh, see, you're not making any money off loans anymore, so now you're just going to start lending more risky people. Now it wouldn't be done that way because it's taken care of on the FICO front. So what I would advise people is to pay attention, and we'll keep you updated as this gets implemented, but pay attention that if you are one of those that you pay all your other bills and the only thing that's on your credit report is a bunch of medical collections that are unpaid, you could potentially be that person that would be able to buy a house under this new FICO model. And more to the point, Lewis, that this is just another creative, out-of-the-box thing that they're doing to try and help people that don't have jobs, right?
But it doesn't. But it really doesn't fix the underlying problem. The person still owes the medical payment. Medical costs are still rising, so it doesn't solve anything. You're just kind of ignoring two major issues: that people don't have money, people can't pay their bills, and medical costs are rising. But you know what? We still need people to buy houses, so let's forget about that.
Well, you know as well as I do, Lewis, that they never want to fix the underlying problem.
No,
right?
They create another problem on top of a problem they already created by trying to fix it.
Right. And
it's the oldest thing. You're making matters worse. Sometimes just leave it alone. You don't know when to stop.
You know, but just think when the National Association of Realtors and everybody else gets their hands on this information, right? They can now push this out. First-time home buyers, best time to buy in last 100 years, right? I mean, here's the propaganda to do that. For some time now, and when people ask me now, like, the question I get all the time is, where is the market headed? That's like the number one thing that everybody wants to know, right? And unfortunately, I have to tell them that, I'm just giving my opinion, obviously, but I tell them it's a moving target, right? It's literally day to day. We don't know. The likelihood, if I stick to my original thought that nothing bad's going to happen on Obama's time, I feel like things are going to stagnate through the next election. After that is where I think things get interesting.
When you say the next election, you mean the one coming up or through 2016?
2016.
But you see what Obama's already doing. He was going to be very bold and say, if Congress doesn't act, we'll act, on immigration. Now he's decided, well, that would really screw the Democrats, so he's not going to do that now. He'll wait till after the election to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that as far as the Fed, and that's why we always talk about how long can they drag these things out, barring, major catastrophes. Obviously, we had, it appears that the Ukraine-Russia situation may be, settling a little bit.
No, new news this morning, Ryan. Now, Russia's saying, they're readying new sanctions, the United States and the EU. We haven't announced it yet. But Russia's saying, okay, you do sanctions. Those sanctions will respond asymmetrically, and we'll probably ban EU flights over Russia. Now, that's a huge deal because we're not talking about Russia. It'd be the entire airspace. Most flights, in order to get to, like, Japan and to, they have to fly over Russia to get to the east. So they do that. That's a huge issue. And they've brought this upon themselves, and I'm not quite entirely sure, Ryan, that the United States isn't doing this on purpose, antagonizing Russia because they need to defend the dollar. But not just that. If they know the economy isn't working, they can always say, look, we had policies in place, the economy was moving up, the job market, everything was going well, and these Russians, they wrecked everything. And to be very patriotic, we now have to be against them, and we have to support whatever measures they want to, do with the banks or whatever it is in order to, fight this threat.
Right.
And that's what's going to happen because the economy isn't doing well, and they can't just say it's because of our policies. If the banks fail, they can't say it's because, we printed money for $4 trillion, or then we stopped, and, the only way you can keep a Ponzi scheme going is to keep, printing money, and we stopped. We don't want to expose that. So they're going to have to blame some external issue. It could be the Scottish, moving away from the UK, causing EU turmoil. Then England wants to pull out of the EU. Now you don't have a counterbalancing major. Who knows what it's going to be? But there's no way they're going to blame their policies, reckless fiscal and monetary policies, whatever issues we have financially, and whatever emergency measures they take aren't going to be because of their mistakes. They're going to be because something happened out there. Russia did something. Someone did something that or ISIS, right?
Nope.
Syria, whatever it is, they're the problems. And I'm not saying that they're not problems, but you almost see how they're kind of hoping that these problems rise to the level where it gives them cover, because politicians do best when their voters rally around them to solve problems. Politicians do horrible when people see politicians not solving problems.
Right.
You know, when the economy's not doing well, they say, oh, the politicians aren't doing their job, they're horrible, vote out the bums.
Yeah.
But getting the country behind a war or some kind of national economic plan, those things get people going, at least for a while. Look how Roosevelt managed to use the crisis and stay in power for 12 years. He probably would have been booted out if it wasn't for World War II. The last time, people were probably tired of him. But he managed to use that crisis to get people behind him. And he was able to blame the guy before him, not his own policies. He never really owned up to it, that his policies caused a second depression in 1936, 1937. But people still voted for him.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you know, they use all, you know, the tactics, fear-mongering and everything else, and people, when they're scared for their physical safety, potentially, they're less...
Or financial safety.
Or financial safety, you know, they're less apt to pay attention to certain things, and, you know, they can distract us for years. I mean, this has been going on for how long now, Louis? I mean, we've moved from one thing to the next forever now. I mean, it's been going on.
Use the word recovery the entire time. Recovery, as we've mentioned, is not a 6-year media event. It's a temporary period between illness and wellness. We haven't got there yet.
Yeah.
And then they I like when they ask the question, why is the recovery stalling? Well, first of all, there wasn't one in the first place.
Right. There wasn't a recovery. I mean, we're the furthest thing from a recovery. I mean, if you take out the mass printing of money that basically became available to these big banks, you know, institutions and stuff like that, we would be in an utter just depression. I mean, I had
done the numbers, Ryan. I had taken whatever the GDP growth was from 2008 to 2012 in actual nominal dollars. It was about 30-40% less than the amount of money the Fed printed during that time period.
Wow.
So there you go. Absent the spending or the printing, we'd have had negative growth.
Yeah, and so if we have
with no escape velocity, whatever that means.
Right. Well, and then so now we basically have, you know, these employment reports that came back again, and now it looks like, oh, well, things aren't as bad. But don't worry about it, because August is typically that month that they revise upward. No big deal. When they come out in September, they'll revise August back upward. And you know what? They'll talk it into existence. It will happen, right?
And September, they don't want to make September, like, they will not, like, make September back to 280 or 290 and, you know, a big number. They'll make it back to almost 200, around 200, so they can say 7 out of 8 were 200, or almost 7 out of 8, you know.
Yeah, because guess what? We have consistency now, Louis, and people love that. They love when...
Well, then they'll give you the average is 200,000.
Right. You know, and it's the same thing with the whole pending home sales and existing home sales reports, right? Everybody's quick to hang their hat on, you know, 1 month. Oh, look, this has been the best month-to-month change in the last however many years, right? Well,
because the last month was horrible, the month before.
Right. So, and, you know, to me, it doesn't really matter. Like, and real estate is all about basically if somebody has the ability, like, can they buy? Like, at this point, if you're buying a house, especially if you're going to live in that house and you're able to take advantage of the low interest rates, and I've talked about this for years, because, Louis, you're just protecting yourself from inflation in the future. Obviously, you can't control taxes and your insurance, but you can control your fixed cost, your interest rate there. If you do have the means, I tell people all the time now, Louis, if they have the means to be able to buy that house and potentially get it, if they can borrow the money from their retirement account or their stock account, if they have one of those, if they do, that they should leverage that, because
How does that work, Ryan? So that's a good question for our listeners. So somebody has a retirement account. They're in their 30s, 40s, 50s. They don't need the money right now.
Yep.
They basically get by on their salary, but they don't have enough money to buy a house.
Right.
Okay, but they have $200,000, $300,000 in their IRA. If they take it out, from what I understand, they have a penalty. So you could take the whole thing out, put the money down, now you pay all kinds of penalties. What is the mechanism to take that money out, as you say, and borrow it?
Yes, okay, so you can take
and somehow not, avoid the penalties? Isn't there something with if it's your first home or you're buying a primary residence? How does it work for our listeners?
Yeah, so all of those plans, they have different rules, right? Like, so it just depends on where the retirement plan's through the government or if it's through a private employer. So a lot of that plays into it. Most of the time on your primary residence.
Let's use most people who have a 401k or an IRA through their employer, or they have a self-directed IRA.
Okay, so most of the time in that case, that what they're allowed to do is they're allowed to borrow against that plan. So essentially, they can take out, let's just call it, if they want to take out $150,000 to put as a down payment. So let's say that a house costs $300, but they want, they couldn't qualify for $300, but they could potentially borrow $150 to get that first mortgage down. They'll allow them to borrow a set amount, and what they essentially do, the interest is typically pretty low on those type of loans, like most of the time around 4% or so, which would be comparable to what interest rate you'd be getting on the mortgage as well, right?
So basically, you're taking out the full amount, the $300,000 on a loan, but $150 using as a deposit, which is also on loan from your IRA 401k. Okay.
Correct, and you're actually putting the lender in a better position because their loan to value now is much lower, right? It's a less risky loan because you're taking some of your own money and now putting it into the deal. You just borrowed it from another place. So you still do have to pay the money back, but you're paying the money back to yourself, right? So
how do you pay it back? Do you pay it back monthly, starting immediately? Do you pay it back a year later, 5 years later?
Typically it's monthly, right? So what they'll do is a lot of paychecks are automatically deposited. Money, it's the same thing. So that money, then whatever loan period, you can adjust that loan period, right? Like sometimes I think if you want to do it over 5 years or 3 years or 10 years, you can kind of move that around. Obviously the quicker you want to pay it off, the less interest you're going to pay. But once again, I think that's, to me, if you're putting yourself in a position to be able to take advantage of the low interest rates and your interest rate on that, assuming you're not going to pay a high interest rate. Like, let's just say it's near where you're paying on the mortgage, 4 to 5%. You can get that.
Who determines that, though? Who determines what interest you pay on your IRA? Let's say it's self-directed and there's no employer.
The financial institution that plan's with. So, like, you can go. Most people, what they do is when they want to take out a loan.
So if it's with Charles Schwab, you have a brokerage account with Charles Schwab. Charles Schwab determines.
Yeah, you'll go in there and basically.
You call your brokerages.
Right, you call them, and a lot of the time it's like they have a site most of the time where you just go in and tell them how much money you want to borrow over what period of time, and then it tells you.
And what if you don't pay? Is it like a default? Does it harm your credit? What do they do?
I mean, essentially, it's money that's.
But you're defaulting against yourself.
You're basically losing money. Your own.
So what happens though? Like you take the money out, you put your $150 down. The first month comes, the second month comes, you pay. The third month comes, you can pay the bank, but you can't pay yourself. What happens?
Well,
you don't lose it. You don't lose the house. What happens to your IRA? Do they take the money out of the IRA to cover it, the remaining money?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what they're going to do, and that's why they won't let you ever borrow the full amount of what's in there. You know what I mean? It's kind of like another similar, like a mortgage loan situation where they'll let you maybe get up to 80% of what's in that account. You know what I mean? Like, you're not going to get the full amount. But also I think that one of the requirements is that the money is auto-drafted from your paycheck. So you don't really get the opportunity to not pay if it's coming from, from an employer-type plan.
You know what I mean? So you have, what if you're self-employed?
Well, if you're self-employed, then basically you just be able to take the loan up to a certain percentage. And as you mentioned, there's probably some remainder, let's call it 20-30% that's sitting in there that's probably going to be used to make those payments.
Make the monthly payments?
Correct. Yep.
It's weird accounting. You're defaulting on yourself, so they take money from you to pay back yourself.
Oh, yeah, and they're assuming most people aren't going to want to default on themselves. I mean, it's...
Well, if you have to. I mean, if you can only make the payment on the bank, you pay that one first.
Correct. But taking a loan out against your retirement account, in my estimation, is much better than than taking that money out and paying the penalties and everything else, right? Because you can at least pay yourself back. You have access to the capital. See, the biggest component to all this is the access to capital. Like, you can't just go into a bank and get a personal loan for $150,000, and if you could, they're going to charge you, 13, 14%.
Right,
So,
but what I'm struggling with is if you don't pay yourself back, what are the penalties? Because let's say you don't pay yourself back and you deplete the other 20%. What do they do?
I'm sure it's
come after yourself?
Or
do they then charge you penalties? I mean, as if you had taken the money out,
Yeah, I'm sure that's what it is. It's going to be like penalties, and it just starts eating into your balance, where basically you're not going to have any money. You know what I mean?
But you have the house, and you're not paying the other half of the mortgage.
Well, there could be. I'm sure. Like I said, I've never taken one of these specifically. I just know.
Nor have I. I've never even looked at it. So I asked the question.
Most of the time,
because that's where most money people is. If anyone has any excess capital in the middle class, it's because of forced savings.
Well, you know what I'll do? As a matter of fact, now that you brought up the question, I'll actually ask one of my clients that actually just recently took out one. I'll ask to see if he can give me his document so I can read the way that reads.
I think it'd be very helpful, because I think that you're mentioning that it's possible that people can buy a house if they can use these vehicles in IRA, and there are, a lot of people's IRAs have gone up. 401ks have gone up in the last 3 years. It might make sense, with these high values of 401ks to take some money off the table and take advantage of the low rates and put it into real estate.
I think it's a very smart move, especially when we consider that the stock market, I feel like, is so pumped up and overbought at this point, right?
And so I feel that low rates are good to buy a house with if you can get access to capital. Well, this stock market may give you the access to capital if your portfolio is going up, like some have 30, 40, 50, 60, 100% in the last few years.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that a majority of people that do have these type of accounts, they have quite a bit of money in there as of right now. And when lenders go to ask you, well, how much money do you have available? And it's like, well, in my checking and savings accounts, I only have $10,000, right?
Right.
But then over here in your retirement account, you could potentially have $300,000 or $400,000 that's
exactly
there. And most people don't really ever say. I don't think that they know that they have it available sometimes.
Because they tell you there's penalties.
But not just that, the financial brokerage doesn't want you to take that money. They don't want you to take it.
No, because now it's out of the system and it's in real estate.
Correct. It's no different. See, you can do those self-directed IRAs. Like you mentioned, if somebody's self-employed, you can basically do a self-directed IRA where you could create your own LLC and you place basically remember, I'm not a financial advisor or anything, but I'm just talking about this because I've had experience doing this myself. You can essentially create a company, put your retirement account in there, and manage your own money. There's no penalties or anything. You manage where that money goes. You can actually buy investment properties with this money. You can do whatever you want tax-free, and it goes through a fiduciary. There's a trust account that's set up. So you're following basically all the IRS guidelines, and you can control your own money by. These things are out there. Once again, this is not stuff that they want you to know.
Well, here's another question I'd be interested in knowing is when you take the money out of the IRA, as you recall, I think IRAs are shielded from creditor liabilities because they don't want people to be destitute in their retirement. The money that you put into your home, is it now no longer an IRA style character of that money in your home, or if now you've destroyed the shielding from creditors because you put it into the home?
I'll check in because I don't want to just guess on that. I probably just need to read the documents, but I'm sure that I wouldn't imagine that it's going to affect anything because it was their money to begin with. They basically just defaulted on themselves, so they got the money out, and I would imagine that basically they're just their account value is basically zilch. So they get what they have in their house. I don't think they come after and take it though, but because there was no loan secured against it, right? I just don't know how that financial institution or brokerage reports it to the IRS.
Right. What I'm fascinated about is, given the amount of money that are in these 401ks and IRAs, given that people want to buy homes but they can't, that this doesn't happen more often, and that everyone would know how to do it. The fact that you and I don't know how to do it is pretty telling. It means that no one really does it. And when I say no one, I mean it's not a widespread practice when maybe it should be.
I've been saying this for a long time that I
right,
feel
as
like
a retired person, having your home half paid off or all paid off by the time you retire is probably a good thing than having your money sitting at the whims of the stock market where you can lose 20-30% on a bad Friday afternoon.
Well, just think about
when you
it,
need that money to live.
Right.
But if you have your home covered and it's paid for, now you just got to pay property taxes and food and health care.
Correct. Yep. And not to mention that you know that there's these huge upswings in the stock market. At some point, it's going to retract by the same amount, right?
Correct. So that's what I mean. Whereas if you can take your money out on an upswing and put it into your home, and then only have to pay small amounts back, eventually, if you do that in your 30s, 40s, and 50s, you'll have a home when you retire. And your exposure to the stock market, you can keep whatever's left in the 401k. That should cover your expenses because your biggest expense is your home.
And that's the biggest reason of all, right? Is that the largest amount of money that goes out every month is typically your housing expense. So if you
rent or your mortgage,
right? So if you can borrow money that's yours from your retirement account and potentially put that down and secure, even if it's not the full amount, but a large chunk of it, and then you can secure a mortgage for a couple $100,000, whatever it may be, at 4% levels or somewhere around there, you're going to be, to me, you're ahead of the curve there because you're protecting yourself from future inflation. You've got a low mortgage, got yourself your housing situation pretty much under control, which is to me, the biggest one to get under control.
Right.
And I think, Louis, see, there's not many people that like to talk about this because everybody's always going to say, don't touch your retirement account. Leave it there forever.
Correct.
Right? Like it's
That's
looked
all
at
you
as
ever hear.
like, right. It's
if you
some
touch it,
bad
there's a
thing.
penalty. It's like something's going to happen to you.
Yeah, but I mean, sometimes the reality is that okay, well, other people have hidden intentions as to why they're telling you that because they don't want you to touch that money. They want you to leave it there so that they can make the risky bets and gambles on things, and they could care less whether you win or lose. They make money regardless of the situation. But if you're looking at it from a perspective of just you want to take care of your own financial future, then this is probably something you should consider. Now, is it something that should be brought up? I don't know. I think that, it would be nice for there to be a lot more accessible information about this, but there's not, which kind of tells me that, that's why it's not really commonplace is because nobody really knows about it. Same thing about self-directed IRAs. I feel like every person in the United States should understand what that is, okay? Because that basically means that you can control your own money. Now, are you smart enough to control and manage your own money? I don't know. But you should at least know that you have the ability to do that.
Right.
Right? And the only place that you can go to find information on that is you have to go to Google and you have to do a little bit of searching around. They're not going to
right.
Financial brokerages don't want you to know this, though, because this is how they make money by letting...
Oh, sure. They can manage IRA fees, 401k fees.
I just had a client of mine that did a self-directed IRA and bought 3 properties in Florida, like $60,000 and under. He's got a very nice cash flow coming through. And
nice.
He's very smart, though. He understands. He really believes in being diversified, right? So
and you can also buy gold and silver with your IRAs, but that requires some investigation and some knowledge too.
But you know what? Sometimes the best
overseas
thing is
as well. You can have the money overseas. You just have to know how to do it.
Yeah, but the thing about it was that he didn't even know that was an option. I was on the golf course with him one day, and he said,
Did you see Obama?
Huh?
Did you see Obama?
No. No, it was not him. Didn't have a clue about just how people were buying these properties because his brother was basically buying and flipping properties down there, and he was just like, they're so cheap, I could get 3 or 4 houses and I could have nice cash flow coming through. I said, yeah. I said, just go and get it from your retirement account. He's like, oh, how does that work? It took him like start to finish, it took him like a month to set it up, to get the money moved, to write that first check for the first property. And he's like, now he's reporting back to me a year later, and he's like, it's the best thing I've ever done.
But that's different then, see, because that's an investment. That's not the same thing as taking the money out to buy your own home, though.
Yeah, so that's 2 different things.
Considered a self-directed investment. When you buy your own home, it doesn't fall under that scheme, I think.
No, it doesn't. But what I'm saying is, in general, these are things that are not talked about.
That no one knows how to do that either.
Right.
But
these
what
are
I'm
both
saying
things
is
that are under the radar.
Yeah, but what would be more common is people, rather than taking their 401k out and doing it on their own and becoming a real estate investor, which requires, a little more knowledge and a little more wherewithal, more people would be interested in taking their money out and buying a house for their own benefit, their own use.
In my situation, let's just assume that I had a retirement account and I didn't own a home right now. I would 100% go and borrow that money from my retirement account to put a big down payment down on the house, right?
Yeah.
I would pay the interest rate to the retirement account. So let's just say it's 4%. I pay it. I turn around, take out that mortgage at probably another 4% or lower interest rate. I would do that in a heartbeat, 100%. That is exactly what I would do.
Most people would do it too if they knew how to do it, though.
And so maybe what we'll do is maybe I can try to find somebody. There's got to be somebody out there that tells people how to do this, right? So I'm going to search the internet and see who I can find, and maybe we'll get them on the show and actually have them kind of dive in deeper so everybody has a better understanding of this, right?
Yeah, I think it's something that there's a demand for, but people don't realize there's a demand for because they assume it doesn't exist, that option.
Correct. They assume it doesn't exist, and like I said, they're basically looked at as doing something terrible when they start.
Yeah, it's almost like criminal. It's like not going to college. You crazy. Everyone goes to college and everyone leaves their money in their 401k plan. Otherwise, bad things happen.
Yeah, what are you, stupid, Louis? You don't want to go to college? I mean, everybody does that.
It's crazy.
It is, but once again, and it just goes back to the whole media thing, though, right? They create this frenzy, that you have to follow the herd. And
yep.
What do most people do? They follow the herd. So
absolutely,
it's very painful to be the one person that's kind of out on their own, right? They always say that the most lonely place in the world is typically the entrepreneur, right? The one that's out there, because everybody's always looking at the entrepreneur as like, oh, that's a dumb idea, or that's
why didn't you get a job?
Yeah, why don't you go work for somebody? No, because I don't want to work for somebody else. But what they don't understand
is that if everyone thought like that, there'd be no jobs to go to because no one set up the companies to create the jobs.
Correct. Yep.
Well, no, the government would. See, that's what people think. The government creates money and the government creates jobs. You get all your wealth from politicians.
Well, yeah, our entire, economy is built around our government and the Federal Reserve and what they want to do, when they want to do it, and we're just people that are on the sidelines taking this all in. But I'm sure if you listen to our show, guys, and you go to watch any of these other ones, CNBC, MSNBC, any of these shows, you're going to get the complete opposite end of the spectrum. You know what I mean? Basically, they're going to label us as crazies that don't know what we're talking about because they're going to say, hey, look, see, gold and silver's not moving.
I would love for them to label us crazy. We'd get some attention.
I know. Stock market.
Pay attention to it.
Because the only thing that matters to them is that the stock market's high and we have a low interest rate environment. That's it.
That's it.
What would happen if the stock market went to 7,000 tomorrow, Louis?
They'd be talking about buying opportunity.
Oh, yeah, because you know what? It was just an anomaly that it dropped by 50%. Because
it always goes up.
Because the news
and then all eyes would be on the Fed, not what a company's going to do. Now, what is the Fed going to do? What is that little woman Janet Yellen going to do? What is that guy Fisher going to say?
Right. They can't let this happen. They have to step in and do something, right?
They created it, so they're kind of responsible, so they kind of have to fix it.
Well, and just imagine somebody loses 50% of their portfolio. The next thing that the fund manager is going to talk about is you got to stay the course. You got to stay the course. After they just took 50% of your money. Well,
then they'd say, but you're net up because you were down 60% 6 years ago, so I'm still ahead of the game. They can't lose.
Oh, yeah, you really can't. But I mean, and I think that's really where we're just as a country we've been conditioned. Now, not everybody's like this, but you've been conditioned to be okay with losing, right? And one of the sad facts is that if I asked a normal person off the street that was probably getting ready to get a loan, they probably couldn't even tell me how much was in their retirement account. I honestly have.
They might not even have a retirement account.
Well, if they
unless the government, unless the company set it up for them. A lot of people.
But I think, but it's pretty telling, right? If I were to ask you, Louis, how much is in your checking savings account, you could probably tell me pretty close to the number, right? But if I ask somebody else a question about how much they have in there,
no, it's how much. How much does the bank? How much in fees do I owe the bank for being overdrafted?
Right.
I don't keep any money in the bank.
Yeah, well, with retirement accounts, basically, people couldn't tell you probably within $1,000 of how much was in there. They just don't know. Well, I haven't gotten my quarterly statement in a while. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, a lot of changes during the quarter.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, it's kind of mind-boggling to me.
Well, but the reason that people don't know the day-to-day for their retirement account is because they're not going to do anything with it. They're conditioned to think, well, I look at it, in 10 years from now, 20 years from now, whenever my retirement is.
and hope that they have as much
money
as
it is hope, right? You basically just turned it over. There's nothing you can do about it. And they've convinced people that you don't know what you're doing. These guys are pros. Give it to them.
Yep.
And that's basically with everything. The Fed is in control of the economy. Don't worry about it. This is the mentality. They got people, that don't leave burning buildings. They tell you everything is okay. When the building's on fire and you should leave. But you hear the announcement on the speaker, please remain seated. I leave no matter what. I don't care what the announcement says. If I smell smoke and they tell me it's contained, just like with the Fed, subprime is contained. No, it isn't. But they think if they say it, they'll avoid a rush to the exits.
Right.
And most people are calmed and soothed by these authority figures that tell you everything is fine. Even though in their minds and their guts or hearts or intellect or whatever it is, they know it's not. They think, okay, well, this guy said it's fine. I mean, you got Janet Yellen sitting there telling you everything is fine. She doesn't even inspire confidence, and yet she gets away with it.
It's fine because I said it's fine.
You could put my 11-year-old son up there. Yeah. If you told everyone he was the Federal Reserve chief, they'd listen to him.
And it wouldn't matter what he said either.
No.
Yeah.
He could talk about Daleks and toys that he plays with, and people would start writing what he's saying because he's the Federal Reserve chief.
It's a pretty sad that this is to the point where we're at right now, right? I mean,
think about it. This woman gets up there. It's no different. That's because she's a woman. Bernanke got up there, and people used to listen to the drivel came out of his mouth too.
Yeah.
They prognosticate. They're always wrong. Then they tell you they're going to print more money, highly accommodative monetary policy. I mean, call it quantitative easing, and everyone goes, oh, okay, that's going to work. And then they tell you we have a recovery, even though we don't. And everyone says, well, it's in the papers. It's in MSNBC. It's on CNBC.
Yeah.
There must be a recovery. There's a housing recovery, economic recovery.
Right. Well,
stock market is high.
Right. Well,
and then when you find out, well, the stock market's only high because, you point out, sovereign funds, the Fed buys stocks, companies buy stocks. No one else does. And you call that phony? No, it's not. That's not phony. It's the highest stock market. Obama's saying it's, the economy's better off. The stock market's higher.
I don't even know how it should be allowed for them to be able to invest in the stock market, period. Like, I don't.
Well, why should they be allowed to set the price of interest rates and money?
I agree.
Why should they be allowed to buy from itself or its agent, buy U.S. Treasury bonds, print money to buy bonds? So we want to borrow money. No one will lend it to us. So we'll just print it up and lend it to ourselves. In the mega trillions. That's what they do. And people are thinking, oh, it's quantitative easing, and if you take into account... No, you don't take into account anything. They're printing money.
Right. Somebody's got to buy it, so they got to be the one to do it.
Right. And then they say we're going to stop and everything's going to be fine, and somehow everything is fine because there's still an appetite for U.S. bonds now that the Fed's not buying. So what they argue is the Fed really doesn't matter. The Fed isn't, the Fed is a minor. No, they're not a minor player. The Fed was the U.S. bond market, and somehow, if we now have alternative buyers, why did the Fed need to be there in the first place? Because the Fed said they were buying bonds to keep interest rates low. Well, they stop buying bonds and interest rates go lower. That means they didn't have to buy them in the first place. So which is it?
Right.
Why are rates low? Is it because of the Fed and their policy, and they said they were going to lower rates? Well, they're low anyway. So either they wasted the money printing the $4 trillion, or they didn't need to print the $4 trillion.
Yeah. And I feel like that this has been a plan like that they've been kind of adjusting on the fly. And I think that it's very measured. I believe that, they've gotten European Central Bank and other central banks to kind of buy into, hey, you need to kind of do what we tell you to do here. And so they got themselves out of the situation by basically getting rid of quantitative easing, and now somebody else is picking up the slack for that. I think that was they didn't necessarily have the details worked out of how that was going to all play out.
But then who bought all this? Who's buying all those bonds dollar for dollar that the Fed stopped buying?
Well,
Belgium is what we've seen.
Belgium and other central banks.
But why would they?
Because
why would they buy them at the same high price? There's the Fed stops buying them. You would think now that a major buyer is out of the market, that would mean prices would get cheaper, yields would go higher. Why would somebody step into the shoes of the Fed and buy and overpay the way the Fed was overpaying in the same amounts? It's the same illogic of why would somebody dump thousands of gold and silver contracts on the market in one go.
Right.
It doesn't make any economic sense unless you're trying to manipulate the market.
Well, which is what we know.
Yeah, well, if they manipulate it on interest rates, why wouldn't they manipulate it on gold and silver or anything else? Stock market. If they're involved in the stock market, why are they in the stock market? To make money? No, they're there to manipulate the prices.
Yep.
They buy futures. You saw that in the zero.
Yeah, we talked about that,
article. Yeah. Right. Well, futures are a way of manipulating the market.
Yep.
Naked short selling. Why would you do that? Why would the banks have short positions or gold positions in gold and silver? Are they going to use the gold and silver? Do they have a need to? Do they need gold and silver? No.
Right.
They're not hedging it because they have clients that they have to deliver on. Well, they're shorting it. Yeah. They're shorting it just to drive the price down.
Yep.
Because they're protecting the dollar and the whole Federal Reserve System.
Yep. I agree. You and I are on the same page with that. We're we're coming.
I didn't mean to yell in your ear there, Ryan.
No, you're fine. We're all definitely on the same page. It's frustrating to me as well. I don't understand it, and when stuff doesn't make sense or it doesn't add up, it typically means that there's foul play and manipulation and everything else, right? That's exactly.
And then you hear instead there's weather, there was a YouTube video. You get excuses that don't make any sense.
No, you could just point the finger directly at the Fed. They're the ones that are spewing out all this information are the ones that are at fault. They're never going to come out and say that, but we know why things are taking place. The stock market has no business being where it's at. Interest rates have no business being where they're at. Like I said, we could also make the argument that we could potentially help the real estate market by actually raising interest rates up. Now, would prices come down in the short term? Yes, but it would actually help stabilize the market, I believe, to do that, because you'd normalize prices, right, at a higher interest rate. Banks would take on more risky loans. Not to say that that's smart, but more people would have access to loans than they do now. As just a function of rising interest rates, because they don't want to lend at 4%, guys. They don't. And for anybody to argue that we should have lower interest rates, they just don't understand the way that lending money works.
Right.
They don't. So
it doesn't reflect the value of the money right now when you have interest rates low in an economy that would otherwise be in a deflationary impression absent the money printing and the low interest rates.
What the funny thing, well, Louis, if we had wage growth, if we had job growth, wage growth, all these things going on, the interest rates would be 7-8%. It'd be 7 or 8%.
And it wouldn't matter.
And it wouldn't matter because
historically we've never had rates this low.
No, and the only reason that they're slow is because they know that there's nobody that can really take advantage of them, and it's not hurting anything. It's just letting the banks take more risky gambles and bad bets and everything else. So they can turn around and be bailed out, so we can be QE infinity within the next 15 years. It's just a vicious cycle over and over. But like we said, there's not really a way out. There's not a way out for them, other than just to continue to manipulate as long as possible and try to keep the
right. You can only go one way.